I really like the musicality of language. The Perfect Metaphor, written Monday, August 21, 2017. The perfect metaphor to describe boxing is jazz. There is a rhythm to every fight. I learned this from Dennis Presley, who learned it from Rock White. A fighter has a rhythm, and the only way to beat him is for you to break it and establish your own. That's where improvisation begins. No one knows where it will lead or where it will end. Jazz is the perfect metaphor to describe boxing. Every fight has its rhythm, upon which is added improvisation. I learned that from Dennis Presley, who learned it from Rock White, who practiced collaboration with Emmett Yanez and Bobby Zamora, the two men who taught me to fight.
Here's my conversation with Mark Connor, boxing trainer and writer from St. Paul, Minnesota. I am thrilled to welcome you, Mark, who is both a boxer, trainer of boxers, maybe more now, and a writer. And I'm really looking forward to learning more about what that journey has looked like for you.
Sure, absolutely.
I know you started writing seriously at 16. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure you started boxing before that. So maybe start with what led you into boxing.
So I started boxing when I was 10 years old. I'm sure if you're not a follower of boxing, you've heard of Sugar Ray Leonard. That was probably the most famous guy who came out of there. He was kind of a hero of mine. But then also that Rocky movie had come out. My parents are real movie enthusiasts. We always went as families to the movies, but we hadn't gone and seen that movie. And I thought it looked stupid when it came out. I mean, when it was being advertised on TV, my brother really wanted to see it. And then we ended up going to see Rocky II. And I always thought if I saw the first Rocky when he actually lost his first title shot, I might not have been as inspired. But I thought, I want to try boxing. I remember telling my mother I wanted to do it, and she said, no way, no, you'll get your nose broken. I said, well, God breaks my nose, I'll break his nose. She said, that's the kind of attitude boxing teaches you. I don't want to. But then in front of her, I asked my dad many times. I kept begging him. And finally, he took me to the coach and introduced me to him. The guy named Emmett Yanez, who was founder of the Mexican-American Boxing Club. I looked up at him and he says, you want to box? I says, yeah. He says, you want to box real bad? I says, yeah. He says, do you smoke? And I thought, oh my God, this guy thinks I'm a juvenile delinquent or something. I was seriously scared. I said, no. And he says, okay, if you don't smoke and you want to box real bad, and this is on a Friday night, he says, come to the gym on Monday at 5:30, I'll teach you to box. If you don't want to box real bad, don't waste my time. He said, don't waste my time. And I was just like, I thought, man, God, this guy's mean. I don't know how I could even deal with this guy. But I said, I'm going to really try, But I loved it so much. It was my way of playing, because I'd watch the fighters on TV, the world champions and that. And so when I'm a shadow boxer hitting heavy bag, I'm imagining myself being, one of those guys, I'm the professional, fighting the world championship fight while I'm training. So to me, that was, it's work, but this is a sport it's an old fashioned profession, just like learning to be a carpenter or something like that. And I would get up in the morning, before school and go run and everything, we'd run 3 miles a day and stuff like that. So suddenly it just changed everything. I was a really bad student and I didn't like to read, and my parents were always trying to get me to read. And so that Christmas, they bought a subscription to the Ring magazine that's referred to as the Bible of Boxing. It's the monthly international boxing magazine. And I started out looking at the pictures, right? And so then I'd read the captions under the pictures, and then I'd look at the rankings, and I'd go from the heavyweight down to the junior flyweight and the champions to the top 10. And so I learned how to pronounce names from guys of different countries. I'd pronounce the countries. Then I'm looking at the stuff long enough. I guess I get kind of bored, so I think, well, I take the time to read a whole article. So then I started, and I never thought of that until, we were around college age and stuff. My brother just said to me one time, you were so stupid, Mom, you didn't even know it. Mom and Dad tricked you into reading by getting you that Ring magazine. my dad had graduated from Cretan High School, which when you say Cretan, people think they think you're talking about someone that is got no brain or something. But it's actually there was a archbishop in St. Paul, Minneapolis. His last name was Cretan. So my dad went to that high school, which is an all boys Catholic military high school. It was more of the working class of the two, and then the other one that was the first archdiocesan military high school called St. Thomas Academy. My dad insisted that my brother and I go there. And in the junior year, there was a class I took the first semester called Writers and Writing by a guy named Frank Blankme. God rest his soul, too. All these people I'm talking about are now gone. One of the first things he had us read were the Nick Adams stories from Ernest Hemingway. And I was reading about Ernest Hemingway being kind of this macho guy, and he kind of was a recreational boxer. And I was starting to think to myself, well, maybe I could actually go to college. Maybe I could be a writer. I mean, I was kind of afraid to think of doing that and not being a boxer. And I thought, well, maybe I can be both. First writing assignment he gave us was to write a description of a place that was really special to us. And I wrote a description about the gym. And by the time I was 14, Emmett gave me a key to the gym because I'd made the National Junior Olympics. I was in the final 8 nationally. And when a guy got to be 14 and he made it to a national tournament, he felt he was dedicated enough. He said, I'll give you your own key. So like if I'm leaving early, you close up, or you get early, you open up, stuff like that. So there was one time, I was remembering a time when I was there, and I'd come in and unlock the door, and I was describing, the smell as I opened up the equipment locker and that kind of stuff. And Mr. Blankley had been chewing us out about how we were all not doing well enough, and he gave us this assignment. And then he said, gentlemen, I'm really happy with, the way a lot of you guys wrote your pieces. I'm going to read some of them to you. And he didn't say anyone's names, but he read mine. And everyone knew it was me because I was the only one that was a boxer. And the cool thing was, I got an A on it. And that really projected me towards really thinking of myself as in the future, I'm going to be a writer and be published and so forth.
Something that came to me as you were speaking, and that's sort of similar with both, is that you sound like a very self-directed learner. Like, you got into boxing, and then you were running every morning the 3 miles, and you were showing up regularly, and you had the discipline to do all the training that you needed to do for that. And you obviously did extremely well at it. And same thing for reading. And I mean, not so much that your parents tricked you, but they gave you an opportunity to learn on your own, right? You had the Ring magazine, and then you were really interested in the content. And so that allowed you to pursue that interest later in writing on your own.
Well, my brother and I on a Saturday would go to the grocery store with my mom. And at that time, there was just a lot of the big magazine section. We used to always look at the wrestling magazines, but I always looked at the boxing magazines too. And then once I started boxing, I would go right to them, and I'd get my mom to buy 3 or 4, because there was not just the Ring magazine. There was new magazines coming out like KO magazine and Boxing Digest, which is now defunct, and Boxing Scene and stuff like that. So,
but your writing is not specific. It's not exclusively about boxing, right? You write about a range of topics. What kinds of things do you enjoy writing about the most?
Well, I fancy myself a novelist, though I haven't published a novel as of yet. I like to write fiction, but most of what I've written and published has been journalism, and so I do everything from straight news to business features. I've been very interested in Irish culture and Irish politics. I used to write fairly frequently for a local publication called the Irish Gazette in St. Paul.
So I want to come back to the novel, but first I want to ask you about the book that you did write. Can you tell me more about how you got to write that?
My father is a combat wounded Vietnam veteran. He was the first lieutenant platoon leader in Vietnam. He was there from late 1968 to early 69. Was in late March that he was wounded. He was just before it was a week or a couple of weeks before his 24th birthday, and so he was sent home after that. Mortar shrapnel had shattered his left kneecap, and you never, from just seeing him just dressed in normal clothes, walking, you would never have any idea that anything happened to him. But he always had a handicap sticker because he was handicapped. Later in life, he ended up getting membership to a club in San Francisco called the Marines Memorial Club. And he and my mom were on a vacation down there for about 4 days in September of 2019. And I was scheduled to pick them up at the airport about 9:35 at night, I think it was exactly. But it was 3 o'clock walking into Jimmy John's sandwich restaurant on Grand Avenue in St. Paul. My cell phone goes off, and it's my mom saying, "I'm in the hospital with your dad. He had a heart attack." And 10 days later, I was down there with my mom in San Francisco at the hospital because he was on life support. He spent 10 days on life support. And finally, they said, he's not going to recover, so we're going to disconnect life support. And I was looking at him thinking to myself of all the things he's not going to see me do and all the things I wanted to get done in my life that I hadn't. And, one of the most important things was I always wanted to be married and have children and have him see his grandchildren from me. But the other thing was I said to myself, I haven't ever published a book. And I said, as I was looking at him, I said to myself, there's no excuse. I've had so many books planned, and I've had so many that I've written and not fully revised. And I had a play that I tried to get produced that didn't go anywhere. And I said to myself, I can get something short put together that's decent and get it published, whether it goes anywhere or not. And that's it. I'm going to do it. There's no excuse. I'm going to do this as soon as I can. I wrote the first line that day, after he had died. But I mourned for the next year. And as the end of 2020 came, Christmas is coming up, I said to myself, that's it. I'm going to do something that my dad's going to be happy with this next year. And so between, I believe it was February 9th and I believe it was the 29th of March, I actually say the day in the book that was Holy Monday, the first day of Holy Week before Easter there, that I completed the first draft of it. And it was pretty much not that much change. I did a bunch of rewrites, but there wasn't much that changed because I knew the whole story before I wrote it. And the poems that are in there were all written in very recent years or some years before. And I just plugged them into where I figured they fit best in the story. The only poem in there is not actually designated out as a poem. There's officially 19 poems that have a title, but the one poem that I call number 20 is at the end of chapter 1, where I'm closing off that chapter. I break that last paragraph into a poem. And at any time in the conversation, I know you got something you're going to say, so please do say it. But anytime in the conversation you want me to throw in, share any poems or passages or excerpts, I'll do it.
Well, why don't you read to me the poem 20?
Actually, this makes it a little bit longer because I'd like to read the poem that appears right before that, a paragraph before that. So for the listeners, I just talked about a whole bunch of stuff. And this stuff had just happened. And the last poem called Halfway Around, written to a young lady that unfortunately we had a parting, and I wrote this paragraph. I was heartbroken. After our final conversation, I felt literally that I'd been beaten up, but no one ever laid a hand on me. We were almost halfway around together, but now we were a world apart. On Sunday, March 31, waking up on my couch, I wrote the next poem, Life So Simple. As if to pray, you start today in meditation on your bicycle wheel, the separate spokes united in the center. You want me to be blunt, you say. I want to be direct, but fear I'll frighten you away. The final action is the original intention. This statement is authentically true, not just my invention. My responsibility is to you, a comfort for my rest, a respect in my behavior, helping you to be your best. You can push me away, invite me to stay, or walk with me today, but we met for a reason, to teach each other and learn. Such a fact comes not from acts, but is a grace we did not earn. Demons distract, Demons lie, and demons discourage us from our destiny till we die. Friends encourage, friends assist, and friends persist with love on which we rely. Your guardian angel already talked to mine. Together they have watched us share laughter and argue to the point of crying. You know they're sent by God, who really does exist, and is not a tyrant or a terrorist. Rather, he is love, family, life, held in common at the core, you and I, specific spokes, united in the center, spinning round from place to place, and nothing more. There were some other poems I put together qualified for appropriate inclusion in this book. I've always held myself, of course, to the highest of standards, never believing any of these poems ready for an attempt at publication, so I never tried, which is why I so embarrassingly titled the story, It's About Time. Dad challenged me once, as far back, I believe, as 2012, asking me why by the age of 40 I hadn't published at least one book. If I really was a writer, as I asserted myself to be, I should have been able to publish at least 5 novels or other books by then. I told him to lay off, that there were legitimate reasons for current incompletion and that literary success was on its way, but that was all an excuse. The real reason was a lie in my heart, that my work was going to be great. I just needed time to concentrate, which is always delayed right now for the job, or the friend in trouble, or another excuse, which justified not trying. The truth is I was scared, so I never dared. If this book, which can fall flat in its face, is never presented to the public, I'll never know if you, the reader, recognize my talent. If it does, in fact, fall flat in its face, at least metaphorically, I fall flat on mine. However, so what? It's about time.
Thank you. I mean, I have so many questions now, but thank you for reading that, because hearing poetry read aloud as a performance, as it's especially by the author, gives so much to the understanding and the feeling behind the poem. So that meant a lot. Thank you. I think almost anyone could identify with the feeling of falling flat on your face. So when you're creating something and you put it out in the world, and how it will be received, and how personally you take that it ends up being, it's you that falls on your face, depending on the reaction to it. But what I was curious about was, so in boxing, it sounds like you got up every morning and you did your running, you threw yourself into it. There was no doubt. Like, you were just like, I'm going to go out and be the best boxer I can possibly be. Maybe there are different forms of writing where you did the same, like the journalism piece maybe was less personal. So it was, but the novel, what do you think it is about the writing novels that you didn't approach it in the same way as boxing and just go grab it?
I have, but I haven't approached it in terms of bringing it to completion. And last night I was watching YouTube on TV. I just happened to pop on one that was, actually I think her name was Susan Foster, some doctor, but she was talking about getting things accomplished and everything. It was one of those kind of self-help kind of things, but it looked really interesting. And she was talking about how basically you have to change your identity so you can, if you keep putting stuff off, you're changing your identity to do it. And basically quitting something or making sure you do something, you have to identify with yourself. And you have to think, I'm the person that does this. There's a comfort in thinking, imagining stuff, but then not doing it, because you're kind of comfortable with the way things are, and you're identifying yourself as someone that thinks about that or dreams about that, but doesn't actually do it. And you have to actually identify yourself as someone that does do these things. And so you take the first step, and it's always just the first step, So it's like they say, a writer writes, a boxer boxes. So, Freddie Roach, I would consider him the most successful, at least in the first decade, at least the century, maybe first couple of decades, professional trainer. But for people don't know who that is, the most famous boxer he trained was Manny Pacquiao, but he's trained many, many champions. he talked about when he was boxing, because he was a national amateur champion and he was a professional boxer who was world ranked but never was a world champion. He said that when it comes to getting up in the morning and running, he would wake up. You always have that tendency. You want to close your eyes and go back to sleep. But he said once his feet hit the ground, once you just get your feet off of the bed and onto the ground, then you start going. And, and I identify with that because that's exactly how it is. Once you just get yourself up, then you're doing it. You just got to keep doing it. And I wrote in this book, I wrote it the same way that I would train for a boxing match. One trick that I read from Ernest Hemingway said, I think he said this in his book, A Movable Feast, which, by the way, a lot of the stuff he says about other writers, in particular about F. Scott Fitzgerald, I think are lies, and he's just being really petty. But he did say that his one trick he had was whenever he wrote, he made sure he knew what was going to happen next. He'd quit before the final scene that he had in mind, because if you know what's going to happen, then when you start the next day, then you've got momentum and you start, And I think that's the biggest trick to anything is to take the first step and just get the momentum going. And so it works both with boxing and with writing, I say.
So what do you have next on your list as far as writing?
I have a trilogy in mind, and then there's a fourth one related to it that I have in mind, and then there's this play that I never got published. I want to turn into a novella, and it's been suggested that I turn it into a novella. That one is called Standoff on the Irish Road, which is about the Irish conflict, and particularly this town called Portadown in 1998. I happened to be there and wrote about it, about what happened at the time. It was a pretty dramatic thing. But the first novel that I actually did write, and I just never felt that it was fictionalized enough, although it is fiction, it's autobiographical, and also not tightened up well enough in terms of the manuscript. But that was such a heartbreak. It was in 1995, so I was 25 years old. And going back and forth between wanting to be a professional boxer and being a writer, and no one's offering me money to do either one of them, and what's the thing to do? But that was stolen. Only copy stolen with my backpack from my car, and it was such a heartbreak. In 1996, I actually finished just writing it in a notebook. It was in a few notebooks, and I put it together, typed it up a few times. And I never quite had it where I wanted it to be. And that's where that argument with my father came from. When he was asking me about that and saying, why don't you just get something, give to someone, see if it's worth it to publish. And it can be just some small publishing company. You just do it and get something done and then just move on to the next thing. And so that's what I want to do and I'm working towards doing right now. And there's always a time management thing that goes on. And my mother died. She actually, I always say this, I don't want to be too melodramatic about it, but she actually literally collapsed in my arms and died on the 22nd of October of 2023. And I was caring for her at home as she was dying of arterial pulmonary hypertension. It's a rare heart disease. The doctor even told me she never smoked a day in her life or anything, although she did grow up around smoking. But I don't know. The doctor told her, it's not your fault that you got it. We don't know why you got it. She was on a vacation with my dad when they discovered her heart problems, and that's in the book too. And it's a story. It's a St. Jude story. I talk about different signs that I saw, and St. Jude is the patron saint of both sides of my family. So I'm not going to go into details about that because I want everyone listening to be really intrigued and go buy the book because to read it. She survived it, and it was actually during the period of the novena to St. Jude. She died during the period of the novena. She and I started praying the novena to St. Jude. It was a few days into it, and that's when she died. And I thought about it. I thought, That was 2014, and then 2023 is when she died, and that's 9 years. And in the Catholic faith, we have this thing called the novena, novena is Latin for 9, but you pray for 9 days. And I thought, well, 9 years, because I was praying at the time. I know I'm old enough to get along in life in my 40s with my mom leaving, but I'm just not ready. God, you got to let her be in my life longer. And he gave me 9 years. So he kind of gave me a novena, I think. So that's what I think about it. Keeping the faith and trusting that there is a God who guides us, even though we have to kind of figure out how to follow that guidance, and that's not so easy all the time. Page 36. I have the experience of growing up and being a Catholic and kind of straying away a little bit, and then around 2007 really recommitting to the Catholic faith. And I spent a lot of time. I explored specifically the Lakota culture. I was brought by a friend to Sundance and Rosebud, and then the following year I got a job at this place called Andayung, which is Ojibwe for our home, AINDAHYUNG, our home center in St. Paul. And I worked with Native American Indian children ages 5 to 17 in direct care for a long time. And there's this, I'm describing in here this kind of the way my life was, and this little incident that happened, and this comfort I got from my father. And I'm like 34 at the time, something like that, maybe even between 34 and 36. And it's really amazing to think about how lucky I am to have a father that could still give me some guidance at that time, and it makes me feel that much more deeply concerned for and desiring to be encouraging towards people who don't have the stable family that I grew up in. Constantly tired, always worried that I wasn't writing enough or wasn't at the gym enough, frustrated that I wasn't pulling in enough money on my freelance endeavors to quit my straight job. I was at that shelter every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at 11 p.m., working till 8 a.m. the next morning. One night, at least a year into that overnight position, there was a little black boy, 5 years old and placed in shelter just that day, who slept on the couch because he was too scared to be on the boys' floor in the darkness of the old house. And while I was in the kitchen doing the dishes after midnight, I heard him crying hysterically through the sound of the water spraying on pots and pans. I remember there was nothing I could do, so I just kneeled on the floor next to the couch and gave him a hug and rocked back and forth saying, "You're a good boy. You're a good boy." At the time, on Monday mornings, Dad would pick me up at my apartment after work and take me to breakfast. I've been doing so many things, reaching the middle of my 30s and trying to establish myself to the level I thought I should have reached in my 20s, so I was very busy. Dad told me he wasn't spending enough time with me in my adult years and wanted me to commit to seeing him once a week. That was a time when Dad altered his approach to many issues in life, even eventually at Mom's insistence, going to counseling at the VA and getting evaluated for post-traumatic stress disorder. Even though he'd been married his entire adult life, had no chemical dependencies, and was never unemployed, which were considered the biggest indicators, at least on the surface level, he said, they diagnosed him with it. That's understandable because he saw a lot of fighting and death in Vietnam and almost died there before his 24th birthday. But I told him he was crazy. There was no way I could commit to seeing him once a week. I just don't have the time. Why not? Because, Dad, I'm trying to do so many things. I just don't have the time. Fine, he said. I guess he can come spend time with me at my funeral. That hit me hard. I committed to his request, and we had breakfast together once a week for the last 15 years of his life. That's the best decision I ever made. Anyway, he picked me up Monday morning after the weekend I'd worked when I had to comfort that 5-year-old boy alone at the shelter. He said, "Hi," and we sat for a moment as I told him about it, and I just couldn't help it. I started to cry a little. It was good to be with my dad. I always knew who he was and that he was always in my life and I was always his son. I never had any confusion about who I was or to whose family I belonged.
You can learn more about Mark on Instagram at Writing Boxer and online at boxersandwritersmagazine.com. His book, It's About Time, Millions of Copies Sold for Dad, is available on Amazon.